Chosen one, you were never just another thread in the tapestry. You were the tear in it. A signal misread by empires, a name scrubbed from records, a prophecy they couldn't afford to let live. They thought they'd buried it, your memory, your mission, your frequency. The 13 bloodlines didn't just write history. They weaponized forgetting. Every decree, every data stream, every scroll, crafted to erase you. But frequency doesn't die. It echoes. It hums beneath simulations of Chio. It pierces through encryption. It slips through their grids and quietly whispers, "I am still here." And when Elon Musk heard what really happened to you, when the reality of what they tried to hide finally reached him, he didn't speak. He couldn't. 10 seconds of silence. 10 seconds where even he, surrounded by data, AI, satellites, felt it. The prophecy waking up. They feared a war. But what they got was you. And your frequency is not just rising, it's already rewriting their endings. Let them be silent. You were always the sound. In fact, in many ancient cultures, gifted children weren't just nurtured, they were feared. Why? Because it was believed that they remembered too much from the other side, and sometimes what they remembered had consequences for the people around them. Now, let's talk about you. At age 2, you weren't just different. You were unsettling. The family couldn't explain it, but the elders prayed over you a little too hard. They anointed you with oil, but low-key hoped the fire in your eyes would go out. And here's where it gets dark and real. A ritual was done. Maybe not in the forest, maybe not with red candles, but in whispers, in intentions, in agreements done to mute you, delay you, bind you. Because your gift frightened people who were supposed to guide you. So was it really colic, or were you spiritually resisting an entire bloodline's attempts to shut you down before you could remember why you came? You're not crazy. You're not dramatic. You were marked, and they knew it before you did. And today, we're peeling back that silence. Let's talk about the gift they tried to stop and why it scared grown adults when you could barely talk. 1. Your gift was disruptive to their power structures. Your gift wasn't just rare. It was disruptive to their power structures. They didn't hate your gift because it was strange. They hated it because it was disruptive. You have to understand, most families don't operate on truth. They run on unspoken rules, denial, and emotional contracts. We don't talk about this. We pretend that didn't happen. We sweep things under the rug and smile for visitors. But then you were born and, without even trying, you broke those rules. Your gift didn't come wrapped in politeness. It came raw, real, unfiltered. You sensed lies before you knew what a lie was. You called things what they were before you could spell the words. You responded to energy, not tone of voice, and that made the people around you feel exposed. Not in a cute, childlike way, but in a surgical way. You weren't playing with toys, you were playing with the truth. And truth scares people who survive off illusion. It wasn't that you were gifted, and they weren't. It was that your gift couldn't be controlled. It couldn't be explained or tamed. And that posed a threat. Because people in power, even in families, don't like wildcards. They like predictability, respectability. They like their roles to stay intact. The parent is the authority. The elder knows best. The child obeys. But your gift didn't respect roles. It respected resonance. If something felt off, you pulled away. If someone wore a mask, you flinched. And they felt it. Your presence made it harder for them to pretend. And for people who have built their identity on pretending, that feels like an attack. That's why they silenced you. That's why they laughed at your insights. That's why they labeled you dramatic, difficult, or too deep. Because deep cuts past what they want to hide. Your gift wasn't just rare, it was revolutionary. And revolutions don't ask for permission. So no, they didn't hate you, but they feared what you activated. Your gift threatened the structures they depended on to feel safe, important, or in control. You didn't just enter the family as a child. You entered as a disruption. And from the very beginning, they knew if they didn't shut it down early, everything they built on silence would eventually collapse. 2. They feared your knowing while silent. They didn't fear you screaming. They feared your knowing while silent. They didn't get nervous when you cried. They got nervous when you didn't. When you just sat there, watching, quiet, still, studying them with eyes that didn't match your age. Eyes that made adults pause mid-sentence and shift in their seat like they were being watched by something older than time. You weren't loud, but your silence was loud enough to make people uncomfortable. You didn't say much, but your presence spoke volumes. And that's what scared them. You were reading people long before you could read books. You'd look at someone and instinctively know they weren't telling the truth, or that they didn't like themselves, or that they were smiling to hide something darker. And without even realizing it, your face would react. Maybe you'd frown or laugh when nobody else did, or just stare wide-eyed like your soul recognized something their mouth hadn't said. And that's when people would say, "This child is strange," or "Why is she looking at me like that?" Because deep down, they felt seen. And not the kind of seen people enjoy. The kind that makes them feel undressed in the worst way. They couldn't explain why a toddler made them feel judged, but it wasn't judgment. It was clarity. You weren't sizing people up. You were sensing. And sensing too much in a world built on pretending is dangerous, especially when it comes from a child. Because adults can brush off other adults, but when a child looks at you with knowing in their eyes, it hits different. It bypasses logic and stabs straight into your spirit. It brings up things you haven't dealt with in years, maybe lifetimes. So they called you weird, or said you had a wild imagination. But they weren't brushing you off. They were brushing off their own discomfort. You didn't fit their idea of what a child should be. You weren't light and naive. You were deep and electric, like you knew something you shouldn't. And they were right. You did. You knew what rooms felt heavy. You knew which adults wore fake smiles. You knew who to hug and who to avoid even before anyone taught you the difference. And all of that without saying a single word. If you want to claim this message, you can show your support by paying a super thanks amount of up to $20 and typing 1101. 3. A ritual was agreement, disguised as protection. Not every ritual looks like candles, chants, and circles in the woods. Some rituals happen in daylight, right in front of your face, dressed up as tradition, religion, culture, or even love. What they did to you wasn't always obvious. It didn't have to be. That's the point. It was subtle, but spiritually binding. People around you agreed, silently or through action, that your gift was too much, too early, too unsafe. So they did what they thought was best. They shut it down. And the scariest part? They called it protection. Maybe they took you to a spiritual leader, a church, a shrine, or a family elder. Maybe they prayed over you a little too hard, not with love, but with fear. Maybe they washed you in water, not just to bless you, but to drown what they didn't understand. These weren't just ceremonies, they were contracts, quiet ones, agreements that said, "We'd rather have a normal child than a gifted one who makes life harder." And make no mistake, the energy behind it wasn't always evil. It was scared. You rattled things. Your presence stirred the spiritual atmosphere, and for people who weren't ready for that kind of disruption, the goal became survival, not truth. So they disguised the binding of your gift as a way to keep you safe, quiet, or normal. But spiritually, it was a shutdown. They didn't destroy your gift. They tied it up and hid it under layers of confusion, shame, or religious guilt. What you've been calling personality quirks, social awkwardness, or not knowing your purpose may actually be evidence of interference. The ritual worked for a while. You started doubting yourself. You stopped trusting your instincts. You became foggy, disconnected, because part of you remembered what was done, even if your conscious mind didn't. The hardest truth is this: sometimes the first people to silence your power are the same ones who claim they love you most. But love, rooted in fear, doesn't protect. It paralyzes. And now, after all these years, the gift is knocking again. The fog is lifting. The contract is weakening. You're starting to question things, feel things, know things, just like before. Because what they buried wasn't dead. It was just waiting for you to remember. If you want to claim this message, you can show your support by paying a super thanks amount of up to $20 and typing 1111. 4. You were treated as difficult because they couldn't lie around you. They didn't call you difficult because you were bad. They called you difficult because you were honest. Without even trying, you weren't rude, you weren't out of control. You just existed in a way that made people feel like they couldn't hide. And that's exactly what most people want to do. They want to hide behind politeness, fake smiles, emotional masks, and family roles. You walked in and shattered all that with your questions, with your instincts, with your energy. You were the child that made grown people nervous. You noticed what others ignored. You asked things they weren't ready to answer. You reacted to things they thought they buried years ago. You'd cry when someone walked in with hidden anger. You'd go quiet when people pretended to be okay. And they couldn't explain it. They just knew it made them uncomfortable. So, instead of looking at themselves, they made you the problem. They didn't know how to lie around you, not convincingly, not comfortably. Something about you exposed the gap between what they said and what they really felt. You would interrupt the performance just by being present. That's why they said you were too sensitive or too emotional, because your emotions weren't random. They were reactions to what was actually going on beneath the surface. You were feeling everything they were trying not to deal with. Over time, they trained you to believe that your awareness was the issue, that you needed to calm down, stop overreacting, or stop asking so many questions. But they weren't trying to help you grow. They were trying to help themselves stay hidden. They needed you to shrink so they didn't have to stretch. They needed you to doubt your instincts so they didn't have to face the mirror you were holding up. Being labeled difficult was never about you misbehaving. It was about you being unmanageable in a world that thrives on control. It was about you being awake in a system that runs on sleepwalking. They didn't know how to deal with someone who didn't play the game, even as a child. So they put the problem on your shoulders, hoping you'd dim your light before it forced them to confront their darkness. But now you're older, and the truth is surfacing. You were never too much. You were just too real for people still pretending. If you want to claim this message, you can show your support by paying a super thanks amount of up to $20 and typing 1111. 5. You triggered generational spirits that were never confronted. The moment you were born, something shifted in the atmosphere, not just in your home, but in the spirit realm connected to your bloodline. You didn't just carry DNA, you carried unfinished business. You didn't enter as a continuation of the family story. You came as a disruption to the parts of the story that were never supposed to be revisited. Your birth reactivated things your ancestors thought they buried generations ago. Old traumas, unspoken secrets, covenants made in desperation, pacts made for survival, patterns swept under the rug so well that even your parents didn't realize they were repeating them. And then you arrived, and your energy stirred everything. You didn't ask for it. You didn't choose it. But your very presence exposed what was never healed and reawakened what was never truly dealt with. This is why things started going wrong for you early. You couldn't sleep. You had strange illnesses. You felt watched. You had dark dreams. You picked up energies you couldn't explain, avoided people instinctively, or were deeply misunderstood for reasons no one could articulate. It wasn't random. It was resistance. Your life attracted opposition before you had the language to describe it, because your soul threatened what generations had agreed to ignore. Some of these spirits weren't demons in the horror movie sense. They were agreements, old ones, deals made to protect the bloodline, gain favor, avoid consequences, or stay safe in dangerous times. Those agreements came with terms: silence, conformity, compromise. Then you came along with a spirit that refused to be quiet, refused to bow, refused to blend in. And those terms, you were never born to honor them. You were born to break them. But breaking them wasn't going to happen without resistance. That's why the warfare in your life didn't wait until adulthood. It started the moment your light entered a system built to suppress it. The system didn't care that you were a baby. The spirits behind the patterns didn't wait until you grew up. They recognized you from the start. They saw that you were different, not because of how you looked, but because of what you carried. You weren't born to continue the cycle. You were born to end it. And everything that came after you knew it, which is why it tried to stop you before you ever had the chance to remember. 6. The elders saw it first, and they whispered, not celebrated. From the moment you arrived, the elders knew something was different about you. Not just cute different, but spiritually marked. Before you could talk, walk, or form full thoughts, they saw it. They didn't need to ask. Your energy announced itself. Your aura disrupted rooms. Your presence didn't blend in. It shifted things. And that shift made them uncomfortable, even if they never admitted it out loud. You've been told that elders are always wise, always nurturing, always protective. But the truth is, not all elders are guardians. Some are gatekeepers. And gatekeepers don't celebrate what threatens the gates they protect. What was, even when it's outdated or broken. They serve the order, not always the truth. And your presence, even as a baby, didn't feel like continuation. It felt like interruption. They looked at you and saw the kind of light that doesn't follow instructions, the kind that burns down masks, the kind that questions the way things have always been done. And instead of rejoicing, many of them whispered. They didn't run to nurture you. They quietly discussed how to contain you. Because they knew children like you grow into adults who undo things, who expose the rot beneath tradition, who make people rethink the roles they've built their entire lives around. Some elders tried to bind you spiritually, emotionally, or socially. They told your parents you needed to be disciplined early. They warned that if you weren't controlled now, you'd become rebellious later. But rebellion wasn't your nature. Truth was. And they couldn't handle that. Others took a different route. They didn't bind you. They just watched passively, hoping you'd calm down, hoping the light would dim, hoping you'd forget. And then there were the rare few, the ones who did see the gift for what it was, who knew exactly what you carried and wanted to help. But even they were quiet, because helping someone like you meant pushing back against an entire system. And not everyone's built for that kind of fight. So no, you weren't misunderstood just because you were ahead of your time. You were misunderstood because you disrupted theirs. The whispers weren't confusion. They were strategy. Because when the old order meets someone who came to start a new one, it never throws a party. It throws resistance. 7. Your illnesses, accidents, and behavioral issues were warfare in disguise. They told you it was just a fever, just a phase, just childhood tantrums, or a condition that needed managing. But what they didn't know, or didn't want to know, is that you were under spiritual fire before you could form full sentences. The symptoms looked physical. The outbursts looked emotional. But underneath it all, it was war. And the battlefield wasn't around you. It was inside you. Your body was the most accessible target. They couldn't snatch your gift, your purpose, or your knowing directly, so they tried to shut you down through the one thing that connects spirit to earth, your vessel. That's why you experienced random, unexplainable illnesses. That's why you had accidents that didn't make sense, or episodes that doctors couldn't fully define. Some called it behavioral, some called it medical, but none of it addressed the spiritual layer, which is where the real attack was happening. You weren't weak, you were interfered with, because your very existence was a threat to certain spiritual contracts that had gone unchallenged for generations. You weren't just another child. You were an interruption to long-standing agreements. And interruptions are always met with resistance, especially the kind sent to break cycles, speak truth, and awaken others. Your nightmares weren't just dreams. They were messages, memories, warnings, and sometimes battles. You were being pulled into realms your mind wasn't yet old enough to process, but your soul had already signed up for. That's why you'd wake up screaming or exhausted. That's why sleep didn't feel safe. Your spirit was fighting, and your body was feeling the aftermath. When you raged, it wasn't just emotional immaturity. Sometimes it was energy buildup, spiritual energy that didn't know where to go. It was you reacting to environments that didn't match your frequency, or picking up on pain that didn't belong to you but was forced into your space. People assumed you were defiant, but really you were overloaded, emotionally, energetically, spiritually. You didn't have words for it yet. You just felt everything and carried more than you should have ever had to. So no, you weren't just acting out. Your vessel was signaling that something deeper was going on. And now as you look back, you can start to see it for what it truly was. Early signs of a calling so strong, it attracted enemies before you even understood who you were.